Hello everyone, good morning. My name is Nina Ratsula and I'm the co-founder of the Nordic Business Ethics Network, and it is a great pleasure to moderate today this very important discussion on rationalizing corruption and how understanding these rationalizations can help to counter corruption. This virtual seminar is arranged in cooperation with the Nordic Business Ethics Network, the Swedish Anti-Corruption Institute, and Forensic Risk Alliance. And we have many people joining today this line and very interesting panelists joining the discussions. And just as a starters, I would like to ask everyone on the line to actively participate in today's discussions. We are here for you. So please use the chat to address any of the questions you might have during this discussion. And while moderating this discussion, I will try to get as many questions as possible from this chat. So please feel free to use it as much as you have questions. In today's talk, we will discuss the key results from two recent reports around this topic of today. Institutet mot mutor, so the Swedish Anti-Corruption Institute, published earlier this year a report called 10 förklaringsmodeller bakom mutbrott, freely interpreted to 10 rationalizations or explanation models for bribery offenses. This report provides insights into how convicted persons explain and reason around their bribery offenses. Also on October 1st this year, so a few weeks back, the Nordic Business Ethics Network published the 2020 edition of the Nordic Business Ethics Survey, which aims to understand how people perceive ethical behavior at their workplaces. And these respondents of this survey, they include responses from the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, including employees, managers, and top management. And in today's discussion, we will reflect the key findings of these two reports with four amazing panelists. So first of all, we have Nathalie Engstam-Palem, who is the Secretary General of the Institutet mot mutor. So Nathalie will tell us how the convicted persons explain and reason around their bribery offenses. Then we have Anna Romberg, who is the co-founder of the Nordic Business Ethics Network, and she will reflect the topic through the recent results from the Nordic Business Ethics Survey. We also have Wiley Wakeman, so behavioral scientist from Stockholm School of Economics, who will help us to understand why it is easier said than done to do the right thing. And lastly, we have Anand Modi, who is the partner at Forensic Risk Alliance, joining the panel. And the Forensic Risk Alliance has been working on high-profile cases around ethical failures and will have a good view on cultural or systematic issues leading up to the corporate misconduct. FRA has also been the key partner and sponsor for the Nordic Business Ethics Survey. So today we will discuss with the panelists about the Nordic Business Ethics. The recent Nordic Business Ethics Survey once again reminded us of the ethical issues that people frequently face at work. So in today's discussion, we are specifically trying to find answers to a questions that why don't we behave at work? And we have three questions that we will look into. First of all, we are trying to understand how does the world look like from the employee perspective? What are the typical observations of a conduct that people perceive as being unethical? Secondly, we want to understand, the convicted criminals. How do they rationalize their behavior? And lastly, we will ask a question on what should be done in organizations to prevent misconduct and unethical behavior from happening. So let's start by addressing the question on how does the world look from the employee perspective? What are the typical observations of a conduct that people perceive as unethical? Anna, could you share a bit of the results of the Nordic Business Ethics Survey 2020?
Yes, thank you, Nina, for that introduction. And hello, everybody on the line. Really great to be here with you today. And maybe some of you were part of the launch that we had a couple of weeks back. But I will not repeat what we've said there too much. But what I want to bring forward are some key changes that we see in compared to 2019 and now 2020. Even if a year is a short time, we do see some interesting phenomena. And I mean, the key topic of today is really why people do bad things. And one key issue that we found in the report is sort of a step before this, actually. Why do people not react when somebody is doing the right thing? Because there is always two elements. There is somebody who's breaching the ethical standards or doing something illegal, and then there is a bystander who's not reacting or doing anything about it. And I think it's important to consider both of these. So even if we are going to dive into, you know, the psychology of doing the bad thing, there is also a psychology of not speaking up and not reacting to this. And those combined is really what build our corporate cultures. So I think that is important, that there is usually always a bystander, somebody who looks at it as well and is not saying something. And that is probably the most concerning finding that we had in the survey, was that this share has actually increased. So last year we had, I think it was 47% that did not intervene when witnessing something unethical or even illegal. And this year we saw it was up to 62%, with a pretty drastic change in both Norway and Sweden. Actually, Finland was pretty much on the same level, but in Sweden it was 64% of those who witnessed something unethical that did not do anything. So that's one key issue. Another interesting topic that we dived into this year was also to look more at the roles, because I'm sure we're going to talk about it today in more detail, that there is a difference in between if you are a top manager or line manager or an employee. And I don't know, Nina, if you want to go there already, but I mean, we saw some interesting rationalization, not around the conduct as such, but around why people don't intervene based on the role.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to just have a quick talk on these rationalizations, and then we can ask the other panelists what they think about it.
Yeah, okay, so and some of you may have seen this in social media, but you know, when asking, so not why did you do something wrong? We're gonna come there in a while. But why didn't you intervene? It's interesting that on a top management level, the rationalization is that I didn't consider it as relevant. And then on a line manager level, it's actually scary that the rationalization for not intervening there was that I didn't think it was my business. It doesn't concern me. It's not my job. And then on an employee level, employees did not, this year as last year, did not think it would make a difference. So that's pretty interesting, just on the psychology of being the bystander.
Oh, thank you, Anna. So let's ask the other panelists, how do they feel about these results? So Wiley, how are your thoughts after hearing these results from Anna?
So I think that they're really interesting results to get for a lot of different reasons. And one, I think it highlights this fact that we often come to a conclusion that when people are engaging in some sort of bad behavior, they don't necessarily have any other demands to weigh on their minds. So when you say someone's doing something bad, particularly in times of crises, I think one of the things we're like, well, you shouldn't do bad, but we know in a crisis, there's a lot of other things that are on our mind, right? That are we're paying attention to. So when people are saying they didn't jump in and get involved, perhaps what they're saying is, I had so many fires to fight at this point in time that I thought this wasn't a big deal, and that it will correct itself in some sort of way, or I can come back to it at some other time. Unfortunately, that leads to sometimes the kind of contagion of these behaviors, but I think it's very interesting nonetheless.
We think so too. How about you, Anand? How's your thoughts about the survey?
Yes, thank you, Nia, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm very happy to be here. Yeah, I think that the speak up culture is so important. If I look at my career, over many years, decades even, I've seen a natural progression where things are identified through the speak up, whistleblowing hotlines, and so on. I'd say over 50% of cases that are identified is through whistleblowing and people speaking up and taking advantage of those abilities to speak up. So it's really crucially important. There'll be a lot of fraud that goes undetected if people carry on not speaking up. So it's something that businesses really do need to address. I do think that it takes more than just getting people to say, speak up here. It takes a lot of action by businesses also to get people to speak up. They've got to be comfortable, they've got to feel safe. So they probably is another aspect that Anna mentioned there, is that senior or line managers can often be the culprits around these issues, and people might not feel safe that if they do speak up, they've got to contend with their line manager, who also might know about this, or the process is through their line manager when they have to deal with these issues of speaking up. So they need to feel safe. They need to make sure there are other lines of communication that are open to them to speak up, and also they've got to feel confident that their issues are going to be taken sensitively, and that they are going to be addressed, they're going to be investigated impartially, and that they're involved in some way in the feedback loop about what is taking place in terms of the investigation, in terms of the findings. So I think it's really important to address. And I think a lot of companies can do before getting the message to people saying speak up.
Thank you, Anand. We think so too. Good. Before I ask Natalie's views, so just as a reminder for everyone, if you have any questions, so please use the chat functionality. So we'll pick up the questions from here. But Natalie, your thoughts on the survey?
First of all, it's a very interesting survey, and it's so good to have it now on an annual basis to see what is happening. I have two reflections, because I think, or they're actually one of the same, because they point to what I think is a problem that becomes visible in this study, and it is that we don't have enough leadership in this area. And you pointed to it, Anna, that leaders don't seem to want to do things with indications of irregularities or unethical behavior at work. So what that indicates to me is a lack of feeling of responsibility within this area, which is highly disturbing, since we, as we all know, tone from the top and leaders actually walking the talk is essential for any anti-corruption work. And I also want to point to another thing that I found very interesting in the study, is that there seems to be a contradiction, because top managers stress the importance of ethics the most, according to the study. Yet when looking at the results on who is involved in unethical actions at the workplace, it is the managers. And just to draw a parallel, the OECD just also a couple of weeks ago released a couple of surveys, one being looking at the structure of foreign bribery. And it was very clear in that report that in most parts of foreign bribery cases, top management or line managers were involved in bribery and corruption schemes. So I think combining these two is that we see we have the talk, but we don't have the walk. So we have a lot of work to do with the tone from the top and leadership within this area.
Thank you, Natalie. We fully agree, don't we, Anna? Good. So I have a few comments here in the chat. So from Paul, Paul is saying that these findings seems to be very consistent with the findings of Latane and Darley bystander intervention studies. I guess we need to dig into these studies. I haven't heard of them before. Thanks for the comment, Paul. And also Paula is asking to please share the link of the study which Natalie was talking about. So both of these studies are found from our websites, so from the Institutet mot Motor website and from the nordicbusinessethics.com. And we can share the links also via the chat in just about a few seconds, but you can all freely download the report from the websites. Great, so thank you for the interesting insight. So let's go into the second question. So how does the word look like from the convicted criminals' viewpoint? How do they rationalize or explain their behavior? So Natalie, what were the typical explanations, or should we say excuses, that people gave once they were convicted for corruption?
Well, there were basically two main explanations or excuses. And the first was to blame someone else. Say it wasn't up to me. I asked my manager and my manager said it was okay. Or I didn't understand that this was not something that I was not allowed to do because our code of conduct was unclear. And the second major explanation that we found was saying that this is all a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to offer a bribe, or I didn't mean to accept this. It's all a major misunderstanding. And just to give some context to this study, and this is a study where we looked at all criminal court cases concerning convicted bribery during a 6-year period in Sweden. In total, 96 convictions between 2013 and 2019. So it gives, I think, at least quite a good view of the typical Swedish bribe offender in a national context. But we had these two major explanations. They were very apparent. But also quite a not uncommon explanation model was lack of knowledge, not understanding that what you were doing was wrong. And often it was in those cases referred to a lack of understanding of the bribery provisions in the bribery legislation. And this was often combined with the explanation model to blame someone else for not having given them that information.
Thank you, Natalie. These actually are a bit similar to what we have here. One question, and I let Anna to answer to this question while also commenting Natalie's explanation. So Maria is asking here online that at the employee level, did any of the study participants refrain from reporting because they did not quite understand that what they had observed was in fact unethical or even unlawful?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And at least I think that's in the study that has been done based on convictions, it seems to be a very frequent explanation. In our study, the Nordic Business Ethics Survey, we haven't asked that question like specifically. So Nina, maybe we should add that for next year,
Exactly.
if the person did not understand. But what we have asked is, we have had two questions on compromising. And here we ask if you've compromised your own ethical standards or the company's ethical standards. And in both, we actually see the role of the line manager and what Natalie was referring to as lack of leadership. But I can come back to that a bit later. But directly to ask the question, yes, it seems that there is an ambiguity about, what the rules are. And we see actually in the survey, I should say that, we see that surprisingly, it's only, I think it's one in 3 roughly that receives training on these topics of those that we have asked. So 70% are not receiving any training. So no wonder then that there is an ambiguity around what is right and wrong.
Thank you, Anna. what about the explanations given by Natalie? Anna, do you buy them?
Well, I think it's really interesting that I find them as excuses more. It is not so that it's a convicted person taking responsibility for their actions, saying, yes, I knew this was wrong. I did it because, it was a good deal, or I wanted to win the deal. That is what we assume. Within companies, that's quite often what I hear, that, hey, but they wanted to do the right thing. They wanted to do it for the customer and so on. And this doesn't really seem to be that. It seems more that I didn't know, which is, it's scary that we are still in 2020 in a situation where people don't know what is right and wrong or what is illegal. Because I guess many of us who work with this, we hear over and over again, like, why do we have to have so many resources? Why do we have to have trainings or budgets? Because isn't this all common sense? People should just know what the right thing to do is. And I think this study that Natalie has done just points to the fact that no, it is not common sense, and it's not just to do the right thing.
Thank you, Anna. So Anand, you have a very good also visibility when you look at and investigate all of the misconduct. So do you buy these rationalizations from the point of view?
I don't buy this, and I'll explain why.
Okay.
I think that these are very typical explanations. I will receive these at the outset many times, or if not all the time. And this is, I've categorized these, and this is where the person is in denial. And so they're not owning up to their bad deeds, as Anna quite rightly puts here. And their explanations you probably hear when you first put allegations to people, I just didn't understand. It might look bad, but there's a quite rational explanation for this. It wasn't me. I can't remember, or I didn't know. And if these were truly convicted individuals, then these are not explanations that a court would have agreed with either to convict them. So underneath these explanations is probably the real truth of it, and you can only tease out this real truth when you have very specific evidence to contradict it. And so these explanations are probably explanations where they're still in denial, even after in the face of the overwhelming evidence you would need to convict these people. And it's often my job to identify that underlying information that would help someone, to be convicted, to prove that they're not innocent. And that goes through trawling through the information, speaking to other people, and gathering that information. What's interesting to me, and I do often see this, is that even after you can prove that their explanations don't hold water, that it's not just a misunderstanding, it wasn't someone else, it was them, and even after the person's convicted, it's funny how many people, many culprits, will still hang on to these explanations, denying their responsibility, and it's almost hoping that those not close to the facts will still believe them. And I think there's something around human psychology around that. It's staying in denial, and so I don't. If these are convicted people, I probably would have a very hard time believing those explanations.
So Anand, what do you think that are the most typical rationalizations?
Yeah, I think that I hear a number of typical explanations. I probably put them in a number of categories as well. So you get things like, higher moral grounds. It was to save the company. It was to save my team's jobs and making sure people got their bonuses this year. I certainly hear that quite a lot. It's almost denial of the injury as well. So, no one even really noticed the company. It's not a big deal to the company. It's not that much money. I only borrowed it. I'm going to repay it. So it's not much of an injury. Or often, very often, is I'm the victim. I deserved it. I'm not valued here in the organization very much. I get passed over for promotion, and I add so much to this company. So you get a lot of that type of I'm the victim type of rationalization. But I think, normally it falls into some of these categories, 4 or 5 broad categories where people kind of rationalize it. And I think in every case, in every fraudster's case, there is some rationalization. They're doing it for a rational reason, which is in their minds very clear and sensible.
Thank you, Anna. This is super interesting. We could talk on and on about this topic. So Wiley, how does this sound to you?
It sounds both depressing and interesting at the same time. And I think it's, you know, I think Anna has a great point. So, and I think Paul has brought up another great point. We'll have to get back to in the discussion about moral disengagement, right? So there's actually a typology of different procedures that people go through to blame others, to blame the rules not being clear, to blame the culture. But I think one thing, and I tried to just kind of get to this in my first comment, and perhaps I'll be more explicit, is that we think that honesty is the only moral standard that people are adhering to. And I think if you dig a bit deeper, you can see that people have a strong allegiance or loyalty to the groups that they're in. So us from the outside kind of looking at people, we say, well, you should have been honest. And I'm sure people understand this. But in the moment when you're at work, when you're in and surrounded by group members, you often try to be loyal or show your commitment to people you work with. We like to belong to groups. We like to demonstrate to others that we have an allegiance. So I think what happens often is people are put into situations where they're forced to choose between right versus right decisions, in which one hand is honesty, which is great, and the other hand is loyalty. And Adam Waits, James Dungan, and Leanne Young have a paper in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology that talks about the whistleblower's trade-off, that they're really kind of weighing honesty and loyalty. On the one hand, they should tell everyone, you know, hey, we're doing bad things. But on the other, they're like, well, I want to be loyal to these people. I don't want to get punished. And when they look around, the people that will really kind of change their opinions of them are the people that they should demonstrate loyalty to. So yes, do they know they're doing bad things? Probably. Do they think when they weigh it that at the end of the day, doing the honest thing is the best thing? Maybe not. Maybe they think being loyal and supporting the people they work with is something they should do, and that the consequences of what they're doing aren't so big. And then they engage in this moral disengagement to figure out, hey, it's not a big deal. You know, maybe I'm doing some good, keeping people in their jobs, that sort of thing.
That's very interesting. Anna.
Yeah, I could comment upon this just from the survey results again, because what Wiley is saying is just spot on, because we see that the most common reasoning for compromising is to follow the instruction of the line manager. And that speaks to the loyalty part. Like, you feel loyal to your line manager who says something, and then you're just, you know, following the orders, which is quite scary, because, you know, then I'm wondering, and maybe Wiley, you can speak to this, but I'm wondering whether, you know, we talk about loyalty to one individual, which we see in our survey is the line manager. People break the rules, employees break the rules because they follow the orders of their line manager. That's a simple message that we see. But I'm wondering, what about the loyalty to the company and company values? That should be broader. But it seems that that's very hard for an employee to perceive, that there are two levels of loyalties. I don't know, Wiley, what research says about that.
So there's some research that's come up fairly recently on unethical pro-organizational behavior. And I guess one of the things I might question is, when we think about supporting the company, do we think about the values that are usually on some sort of masthead or that kind of the first book we sign when we sign our contract? Or do we think about the performance implications and kind of getting the job done on a day-to-day basis? And this line of unethical pro-organizational behavior research that's really spearheaded by Elizabeth Umphris at the University of Washington suggests that we kind of do the latter. We focus on the performance of the company. Probably because that's what we talk about every day. You know, I agree that ethical values are really important, but I don't think I've seen research that's done this yet, but I think we would have trouble, even being in organizations ourselves, listing out the values that the organization supports, right? So we all have some sort of code of ethics or code of conduct, I think if you asked employees to figure out, to write what those were, I think they would have trouble doing it. If you ask them what their profits were last quarter or what their expectations are for performance, I'm guessing those are pretty clear. So I think maybe one of the things is we just don't talk about it. We need more venues like this where we discuss these issues and we bring them up and know that we're playing with these ideas back and forth.
That's an excellent point. So we have a very good point also from Carl in the line. So this is regarding the leadership that we talked about earlier. So could it be the case that we do have enough leadership, but the leaders are just more triggered to go for short-term financial incentive and take the risk of getting caught on the way? Who would like to answer this question? Anand, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer this. I think that this came out from, I think, your business ethics survey as well, where you talked about this somewhat, where, you know, one of the interesting findings were how passive leadership or leadership that contradicts corporate values featured quite prominently. I think it was the second observed case of misconduct that you'd identified in the survey. And I think this does really talk to the tone of the top and can really drive poor company culture. And it's no small matter either. And I think it has the potential to be very corrosive in an organization, almost encouraging bad behavior. So I think, you know, that tone from the top really has a part to play. And I can give you probably a good example of this in my life, where I worked on a case a couple of years ago, where there was an incident of a rogue trader in a bank who had lost the bank billions, literally $2 billion in unauthorized bets in the marketplace. And when his case came before the courts, he cited that he was encouraged to take more risk by his bosses and his line managers, by the leadership, effectively, who knew, you know, what he said. They knew what was that it wasn't allowed, and he was even congratulated when it resulted in profits for the firm. And you know, and no one would ask why such large profits were even possible. You know, suggesting that the managers were turning a blind eye to this. So whilst it might not sound too terrible that, you know, you have passive leadership, or you don't have, you know, you have leadership that maybe contradicts to sometimes to the values, you know, this can really fester within an organization and cause real harm. And so from an employee's perspective, it adds that encouragement to them to act inappropriately, and even, you know, benefit from it, getting a pat from the back from their bosses for doing well when it works out for them. So I think it's a good point about that, on the leadership not being quite right and getting that tone from the top right.
Thank you, Anand. Great. So we're ready to move on to the last. Natalie,
can I just add something to that? Because
of course.
From the question, of course, we have leadership, but it's also about what kind of leadership are we promoting, and how are the incentive structures, and what are we focusing on in companies. And I think this is part of the explanation to why we see this more unethical leadership. We are very good, as you pointed out, Wiley, to measure financial improvements and financial targets, but we're not as good as putting up ethical targets and measuring that and really rewarding that. And I think that in order to really change leadership, we also need to find ways to make it concrete, to talk about what is ethical leadership, how should we incentivize that, how should we measure it, and how should we really make it part of actually being a leader and part of the role description. Because I think that we tend to think of this tone from the top and being ethical, and you said it initially, Anna, as common sense, or something that should just be our moral compass. And I hate that term. It's something like we're born with a moral compass. I don't think we are, and especially not in a very gray world where we get into really difficult situations where we have to weigh different considerations. We cannot just rely on a moral compass or a common sense of what ethical leadership is. So we need to really pinpoint that and make it measured and incentivized in order, I think, to really change the tone from the top.
Yeah, and if I can comment quickly to that, I think it's, I mean, that's key. And maybe Wiley, you have more information about the like incentivizing the right behaviors. But what we can see from our survey is also that actually the most common explanation by top managers for why they break the organizational standards. So if we only look at top managers, they actually say over 30% says that it was to benefit the customer. And that's the tone from the top, right? If you have, 30% of those who break standards or from the top, they say, okay, yes, they know it's wrong, obviously, but they do it for the customer. That sends a huge signal throughout the organization of what kind of leadership, what the ethics, the ethical values are in practice. So if you have to break the ethical standards to please the customer, you break the ethical standards. And that's, of course, a bit of a contradiction because we talk about, that the customer is always right and so on. But that is, yeah, I think that's very interesting to see that it's, then on a lower level, they just follow the lead.
Yeah, I might quickly wrap on Anna's point, if that's okay. I think we often think that bad behavior is selfish, right? That there's some sort of, I'm doing it for myself and to give myself a lot of benefits or rewards or bigger bonuses. But I think a lot of unethical behavior is pro-social in some sort of way, whether it's benefiting customers, benefiting the people you work with. I think Anat mentioned a rogue trader in if it's in the UK, I think we're talking about the same person. But this trader had was making so much money at a certain point in time that people were referring to him as a legend. The side account was referred to as Rihanna, which is a reference to Rihanna, the pop singer who has a song, Umbrella. And the analogy is they were saving all these winnings for rainy days when traders wouldn't make money. You could take some of that winnings out and make sure you would cover your losses. So actually, the really bad behavior was incredibly pro-social for the group because they all benefited from it at some sort of way. So I think when we think about bad behavior, we think, oh, it's you being selfish and stealing all the money and running to your house in the country. But in reality, it's maybe just helping someone out. They're having trouble, their trades went the wrong way. If I give you a little bit of my illegitimate winnings, you can go home and talk to your spouse and be happy at the end of the day.
Great. Oh, we have so many questions here. So let's take the next one. So this is really much related to what we are just talking. So Paul is saying that an explanation that I have heard many times is this is a victimless crime. No one got hurt. Business can afford it. How would the panelists deal with this explanation?
Yeah, I can just go. I'm sort of looking at Anand because you are often calculating these games, like and how much a company can pay in penalties. And I'm sure many companies, at least historically, may have thought that, yeah, we will just pay these fines and move on. But at least from the authorities' perspective, they are looking more and more to individuals as well, because this has, at least in my perception, is that this has been seen as an issue that companies have been able to just pay, it's a cost of doing business, and then they move on. But yeah, I appreciate other thoughts from the panelists.
Yeah, I would say that, I do get that, I do hear that quite a lot, that it's only a small amount for this company and it's not doing that much harm, or I only borrowed it, I'll give it back. Often what I find is that if you let these frauds persist, that they can really persist over a long time, and people actually get encouraged and will take bigger risks and so on, and the issue can get bigger and it festers in these organizations. And so one of the jobs I'm often asked to look at is how long has it been going on, and is it the tip of the iceberg? Is it much deeper than this? And yes, sure, a business can probably swallow a small amount of this, and there's a regular cost of business of doing this. But often, if you do let this type of thing persist, and if it's not with the same person, if the controls aren't good for this business, and others are encouraged, or they see this happening, and it encourages, there's opportunity for this type of behavior to carry on, then it can really pose a real serious problem for the business. And you don't sometimes realize that this has been going on for so many years, and if you add it all up, it amounts to quite a lot of money that's been left, that's been lost by the business. So I do hear that type of answer, but again, as a business, it's a risk that you can't let fester in your organization.
Thank you, Anant. No more hands up. So, Natalie.
I think you need to make at least from my point of view, a distinction between more fraud crimes and more corruption related crimes. And talking about corruption, I think that could be one thought that people have, that corruption is sometimes a victimless crime, is just a way of getting advantages in business. But we need to counter that by really talking about what corruption is and what corruption does. So corruption, and at its core, it erodes trust in the company. It is often in the interface between private and public, and it erodes trust in the public sector. It always comes at higher cost at all different levels, and it has such damaging consequences. And I think that one problem in organizations is that we don't really talk about what corruption really is and what it does. So we need to create that understanding that this is not just getting a financial advantage or getting ahead in the competition. If you, for example, engage in corrupt behavior in very corrupt markets, you are actually contributing to destroying human rights and keeping up systems that are really devastating. So I think we need to talk about things for what it is, and then call things what it is. So corruption is never a victimless crime. And one thing we need to do is really change the way we talk about this. Then frauds, you have a different, to some extent, different discussion. But in terms of corruption, I think this is very important to emphasize.
Thank you, Natalie. That's a very, very important point. Wiley, do you have anything to add for this?
No, I think that Natalie said a lot of great things, which is understanding kind of the topology of different bad behaviors helps us address them specifically. So there's actually research out there showing if you ask people to do the right thing, it doesn't necessarily encourage their good behavior. But if you can specifically tailor interventions to the type of behavior you're looking at, whether it be fraud or some sort of corruption, you can then adjust their behavior. So at the end of the day, we all know to do the right thing. But if we could target the specific process in terms of interventions, then we're better serving the people who do these bad things.
Exactly. Thank you, Wiley. So then I will actually move on to the last question. So what should we all do? I think we have touched upon this a bit already, but what should the organizations do to prevent misconduct and unethical behavior from happening? So Wiley, why is it easier said than done to do the right thing?
Sure. So there's lots of things I could talk about, but one I think that would help is to understand that people aren't all bad. We're not evil villains kind of in a castle somewhere. We're just trying to help people out, go home at the end of the day and feel happy about ourselves. So when we engage in misconduct, I think one of the assumptions we make is we're doing very bad things, but perhaps the misconduct we should be talking about are things that we do to support others, things that are very pro-social, as we've already talked about. And then one other thing I think we could do is talk more about it or increase the transparency. So I think Paul Eccleston had a great point earlier in the discussion on the chat on the bystander effect. And there's also this idea called pluralistic ignorance by Deborah Prentice and Dale Miller, which is often in groups we all hold a common view. So we may all agree in this chat that corruption is bad, but we feel really odd about speaking out and saying, hey, are we doing the wrong thing here? And so we kind of politely sit in silence, even though we all agree about the same thing. So we may see someone doing something bad. All of us on the chat may agree in our heart of hearts, think that that's a really bad thing to do. but we don't speak up because we think the others might disagree with us. We don't know what their opinions are because we don't communicate or talk about these things. So I think one thing is having open discussions about the sort of behaviors, as Natalie talked about, that we go through or that we might engage in that look a little bit nice or look a little bit pro-social, and we talk about them and what our views are, so we can all come to a common consensus that these are bad behaviors and everyone agrees about these things.
That's an excellent advice. Natalie, how does that sound to you?
No, I fully agree. And I also think it's very important to recognize that these are difficult issues. We need to really be aware of the fact that this does not come easy and there will be difficult situations. And we need to talk a lot about it. We need to be transparent around it. And we also need to be very clear how we should act and what we should do in different situations. And I also think one key point is really look at the incentive structure and what are we incentivizing. And what kind of culture does that create? And that also goes back to leadership. What kind of leadership and what kind of actions are being actually promoted? And in a speak-up culture, I mean, it's so important to really have that transparent and open discussion that also opens up for people to see that this is hard and not be judgmental in this very difficult topic.
Exactly. Anand, what would you add to this list?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about here is, serious misconduct and how you might be able to identify it as well. And I think that, the work of people like Wiley in behavioral sciences can add an awful lot in this area. And a colleague of mine, for instance, has done a lot of work with the University of Cambridge in the UK in trying to identify, what are the traits of an individual who might be, going to be undertaking serious intentional misconduct. That the likes of fraud and the corruption and the very terrible things that you could end up in court for. And I think there's some great work done on this, but if you start looking at the characteristics of this and maybe try even identifying the people who are prone to doing this type of thing, we look at things like age, time in role, and psychological characteristics, personality traits, emotional intelligence indicators play a good part in this, sensation seeking, risk taking behaviors, all of these things that come from behavioral scientists, the academia world. And if you trying to analyze all of this and see, well, what does it take to make someone a fraudster? Well, it can be that these kind of traits overlap with the great leadership skills that people possess, or actually very high performers that they have as well. So it's something where the two kind of can overlap, that you have some very high performers who can be susceptible to undertake bad fraud. Certainly some of the research that I've read and my colleague has looked at with academia. But it's still interesting to us to try and identify those and understand them, and even try to look through the data to understand these type of risks, because you can still get people to get the best out of people if you recognize these traits that people can perhaps have, and you can direct their energies in a positive way. If these people are, I gave that example earlier about the individual at the bank, these are high performing individuals. They're very emotional. They have very high emotional intelligence. They can relate to people. They can also take very high risks, and they benefit from that. So if channeled the right way, they can really perform. But if not channeled the right way, they can lead to misconduct. And it is interesting how that part of the science can really help you to manage your risks in a business today.
Thank you, Anand. Anna, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think actually the benefit of going last here is that I've reflected upon what was said, but also what's been said throughout this discussion. And I mean, what we have been talking about today gives some very, very good points for everybody who's working with this to consider. So first of all, I think we need to understand that an organization consists, the organizational context has like formal parts to it. And that comes to, our code of ethics, as Wiley was saying, to really specify, what are the expected behaviors or what are the misbehaviors? Are there clear policies and rules so we can really tackle the most common explanation that Natalie saw by the convicted criminals that I didn't know. So that's something that, you have clear policies, you have clear guidelines, you train employees, you make sure that everybody at least knows, what the limits are. So that's the bare minimum that we have to do. And here, not a general code of conduct, please. I mean, a general code of conduct is a great start, but go back and read your code of conduct and reflect upon it critically and think like, does this really help me in a tricky situation? Many code of conducts that I've seen just says, yeah, we have zero tolerance for bribery, we respect the environment and the society, and we have signed up to the UN Global Compact. That does not help an employee in a very tricky situation. So, go back and make sure that the formal parts, the training and the policies are very specific. But then there is the informal element. And I think, Wiley was speaking to that in terms of this, social aspects that we have a need to belong to the group. And here, when we have set, what are the expected behaviors or the not expected behaviors, then we have to work on these more informal parts of the organization to train employees, to train ourselves as leaders to be examples and speak up. Because as we see from our survey and from other research, it doesn't come naturally. The most natural thing when you are in a situation and see something unethical is to not do anything. So I think if we can talk about that, if we can hammer it into our own minds, to be very cautious about when I encounter an unethical situation, I don't want to do anything. So if I'm aware of that, then I can train myself and we should train the organization in actually intervening. So yeah, just a few thoughts from my side.
Thanks, Anna. Listen everyone to Anna. She has a very, very good point. I have also from Maria a quite good and long question. So, in terms of corporate culture, it is important that companies, their directors and employees consider the role of the company in the society in a wider manner rather than just securing short-term gains, such as winning business in public procurement and increasing short-term value for shareholders. We should have encouraged to do things better than, for example, competitors, particularly in emerging markets. The question to ask is, what is the ultimate purpose of this business and its significance for different stakeholders in the society?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody disagrees?
Yes, exactly.
I'll just make a comment on this. I think
yes, please.
This is coming into public consciousness a lot more. So in the UK, I'll just give you an example of where we've recently had a case with Boohoo PLC in the UK, which is a manufacturer of fashion wear and so on. And the issue came about because we've had hotspots of COVID in parts of the UK where a lot of this local manufacturing has occurred. And it transpires that there's been a lot of abuse of labor power, use of labor by these companies that are not even directly contracted by these companies, but are subcontracted and so on. And this has caused quite a furore in the UK. It's been shown in the press, and there's been TV documentaries about it. And I think that gives you an example of where, the profits of these businesses, has been going very sky high during the pandemic because they've been able to respond to demand very quickly and easily by using local cheap labor in the UK. But it turns out that this has been through abuse of labor, and it's quite good to see investigative journalists report this, identify this, bring it to the public consciousness, and even result in share prices going down. I do have to say in those particular examples that people will carry on buying those goods because they're cheap, and so the mass public will carry on buying it. So maybe the problem doesn't really get solved very quickly, because not everyone will buy into this idea that it's a publicly, the public consciousness won't buy into the idea that this is necessarily a terrible thing for me because I still want to buy those cheap goods. But you do see this being highlighted more and more in the press, affecting share prices, and therefore you hope that there's going to be more stakeholders involved than just the shareholders and the companies and their employees. It gets wider. And so there is hope, I think, that, you know, with more public consciousness, more shedding light of these issues, that these get aired, and that, you know, people will take less kindly to them, and it does effectively matter to the bottom line.
Thank you, Anand. Any thoughts on that one from the other panelists?
I might jump in if that's all right with Natalie and Nana. Because I think Anat's got a great point about how pernicious these problems are, particularly when you can diffuse responsibility to other actors in kind of the supply chain. Is these problems are responsibilities of workers on the line, of direct managers, of CEOs, but also of customers, of shareholders. Everybody has a role to play in terms of addressing ethical quandaries. So whether it's Boohoo or we have Amazon might come to Sweden quite soon, and they have had a lot of reports about kind of pushing their factory workers. When people look about who should do something, the answer is probably everyone. Everyone has some sort of role to play. And so having some sort of forum or venue where you can discuss these things and coordinate actors, I think is really important. And what's very nice about this talk is you have people in different organizations and institutes working together to address the problem. So I hope to answer Mariah's question that we encourage this discussion at multiple levels with multiple stakeholders.
Thank you, Wiley. We have a few minutes left, so before concluding, just from all of the panelists, from people online, any last minute thoughts, questions, ideas?
Yeah, if I just can start, my quick reflection is, because we started out by discussing, you know, why people do the wrong thing. So it's all about individual responsibility as well. I think that is one key thing, that nobody should actually blame someone else. I think it's horrible to see that from the study that the Swedish Anti-Bribery Institute has done, that people actually blame others for what they are convicted for. So I think here, you know, it comes to companies, business leaders at the top, but then all the way down to employee level. You know, if we all take responsibility for our actions, but also for the consequences of what we do and what we do not do, you know, we will be in a much better place. So it's always easy to talk about that it's somebody else who should do something. But if I start to do my part, you know, that's what I can influence.
That's a great point. Any final words, summary, reflections? Natalie?
I just want to echo what Anna said, to really emphasize the individual responsibility. And that was also a clear conclusion from our report. But also that we need to really talk about what the consequences of unethical behavior is on an individual level and on a society level and on a company level, so that we are really transparent and open with consequences. Because I think, as you said, Wiley, that is very important, because at the end of the day, most of us, we want to do the right thing, but we need some guidance as to what the right thing is and what the consequences is if we don't do the right thing as we're being taught. So I think those are two very important things.
Thank you, Natalie. Anand, any final conclusions?
Yeah, I would probably echo this. The repercussions, there should be repercussions, I think. And if you want people to take action, then, you know, people shouldn't be thinking, well, it doesn't matter anyway if I don't speak up. There has to be repercussions for it. There has to be an incentive for people to speak up. On the whole, most people will take the most easy option out. and that's just human nature. And there has to be a reason why people will step out of line, speak up, raise their hand, etc. If they feel that they're making a difference, if they feel that any action, if they speak out, that their voice is being heard, that there's going to be an investigation taken at the back of that, that they're helping to improve things. This is all important, and so repercussions absolutely. It's what will deter potential people to stop being to stop misconducting and doing bad things. But it will also encourage people to speak up and see that their voice is being heard and things are being taken forward.
Thank you, Anand. And Wiley, I'll give you the last word before summarizing.
I guess as a researcher, I like talking about ideas, right? So I'm going to just say, keep talking. I think these discussions that we have are really important to bring up the ideas, to make it normalized to talk about bad behavior and the things we can do to combat it.
I really like that, to normalize all of this discussion. Thank you. That was an excellent way to conclude the discussion. So thank you for our amazing panelists for the very interesting discussion. Thank you everyone online for being active. There has been a very active discussion also in the chat. So you might want to take a look at that before leaving the meeting. So with these words, thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.